welcome to Your Choice 2020 General Election coverage on HOMTV. I'm Brandy Yates, and joining me for this candidate interview is Julie Brixie, Democratic Incumbent Candidate for the State Representative in the 69th District. Julie, thank you so much for being here, and at this time, we'd like to give you this opportunity to introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, Brandy. It's so nice to see your smiling face again. I miss the fact that we are not in the freezing cold studio together of HOMTV. I want to thank you so much for having me on the program. I really appreciate all of the work that HOMTV does in communicating with our community, providing excellent election information, and the incredible work that you guys do training our future reporters and camera people and producers in all aspects of really TV and media. You guys do a terrific job in the industry, and in my job as a state representative, I've come across so many former HOMTV interns that are out in our state doing terrific work. I am currently the state representative here in the 69th District, and if anyone would like to learn more about my campaign, they can look for my website at www.juliebrixie.com.
Thank you. Each 69th District State Representative candidate will be asked a standard list of 10 questions. Let's get started with question number 1. Explain how your education and professional background make you an ideal candidate for the 69th District State Representative.
Well, thanks, Brandy. I'm going to take a little bit more time on this question than the other questions because I think it's really important how things have coalesced for me. I got my Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Illinois in physical geography, and I got my Master of Science degree from Michigan State University in environmental toxicology and soil chemistry. So I worked in the environmental consulting field for several years, conducting investigations and cleanups all over the state of Michigan, looking at different types of contaminated sites. They included the motor wheel disposal site, which was a Superfund site right here in the Lansing area. And this consulting work gave me a really good firsthand look at the environmental impact that companies and industries have on the environment, especially if they're bad actors. In the years that I stayed home with my 3 kids, I helped my husband with his soils research. He's a professor at Michigan State. And that research took us all over the state in Michigan during the summers and helped me familiarize myself with many nooks and crannies of our state, from Rogers City to Mansalona and from Iron Mountain to Nobbing Way. So, you know, during that time home with my kids, I kind of tripped and fell into local government. I got involved to help my neighbors and to help protect my own neighborhood, which is an aging neighborhood, from commercial encroachment. And I ended up spending nearly 20 years in local government as a result of that experience. I had 8 years as a trustee and 10 years as a full-time treasurer. And that work experience included budgeting, complete understanding of Michigan's complex tax policy. And in those nearly 2 decades of local government, I gained experience with our local school districts, funding for schools, our public transit agency, our road network, our county government, the funding that goes into those different agencies, and a myriad of other topics. And all of these different experiences really combine together and coalesce and are helping me be a much better state representative as a result of it. So here in Michigan, we have a vast array of natural resources and a rich history of manufacturing combined with an incredibly diverse agricultural products. So we've got to find a way to balance all of those competing interests and work to provide our residents with the quality education they deserve and the infrastructure our state is in desperate need of to have the type of Michigan we want to have moving forward.
Question number 2. What do you believe are the greatest needs of the district, and what are your ideas to meet those needs, especially with uncertainties due to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, Brandy, education continues to be incredibly important, especially with COVID-19 going on. COVID has exposed the enormous inequities in the very fabric of our society, and we need to use this experience to transform our government into one that serves our people better than today. Children who are disadvantaged economically may fall further behind as a result of online learning. Some children with special needs are not really being very well served by the online learning environment that they may be in, depending on which part of the state they're living in. And really all the inequities that existed before COVID are going to be made even worse unless we use this pandemic as a way to totally transform our society.
Question number 3. In light of recent events surrounding police brutality and demonstrations across the country, what is your stance on police reform in the state of Michigan?
Well, I stand with the Black Lives Matter movement. I like what I see from local communities that are devoting resources and hiring social workers and forming DEI committees to address systemic racism. And if it's done properly, I think that this will help change the culture over time, and we should see an immediate improvement in services provided to residents. The military surplus equipment has no place in our communities. There are many good officers who are serving our communities, and we need to recognize and remember that. But we also need to look at our total police presence on a per capita basis. For example, Meridian Township has 0.89 officers per 1,000 residents, and there are some communities that are over-policed when you have really more than double that police presence. I think that I would like to see a statewide study conducted to assess the police presence on a per capita basis. And I think that would help us evaluate which communities are over-policed. Part of the problem that we have is that, that the funding for our local communities has really not kept up with inflation. And this is straining local communities' budgets and causing a lot of friction. And a lot of times, you know, the definition of what is essential is something that is up for discussion in communities, and important services are cut because of these budget constraints. So properly funding our local communities is something that's extremely important.
Question number 4, and you touched on this briefly. Please comment on how you believe the district and the state of Michigan should approach new or continued diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts.
Well, we have to change our culture, as I said, to truly succeed, because policy alone isn't going to do it. So Meridian Township and other local governments in the region are already leading in this effort by establishing DEI committees and task forces. I think that Trustee Jackson and Trustee Wazinski are on the Meridian Township Committee. And these task forces will examine the workplace culture, the policies and the procedures, and take a look at them and see if there's anything that needs to be changed that is contributing to any kind of discrimination. State departments are also undertaking similar efforts. However, the legislature has not undertaken any DEI efforts. The Speaker, who is a Republican, controls the formation of House committees and has not formed a DEI committee. So one of the things that I've been working on is helping to flip the House here in Michigan. And if we're successful in flipping the House on November 3rd, then the House Democrats will be establishing a DEI committee as well. Success comes with changing our culture, and to achieve that, we need all voices to be present, and there has to be a commitment to understanding each other and addressing the institutional racism that's been woven into our society for centuries.
Question number 5. What are your thoughts on how Michigan can address major topics of concern, including but not limited to human trafficking, sexual assault and domestic violence, the opioid epidemic, and gun violence?
Well, that's a long and really important list. We have made some progress on human trafficking with some reforms that we've undertaken at the state level. However, our laws give survivors of sexual assault the least support of nearly any state in the nation. Brandy, 86% of child sex abuse goes unreported. And that's mostly because Michigan's statute of limitations is among the narrowest in the entire country. Our laws give survivors so little time to come forward that our laws are essentially shielding their abusers. And our laws in this area, they also completely lack a moral compass. Michigan is the only state to pass a law restricting access to justice for survivors based on the occupation of the abuser. We defined the occupation of the abuser as which victims or survivors would have access to justice. It's not about who committed the abuse. It's about those who overcame it. This is about our sons and our daughters, our nieces and nephews, our husbands and wives who've been afflicted by a public health crisis that's been hidden for far too long. All survivors need access to justice. That's why I worked really hard with survivors and advocacy groups to introduce legislation to eliminate the civil statute of limitations in cases with a criminal conviction and to extend the statute of limitations to age 48 or 7 years from the time the survivor realized that they were abused, whichever is later. Most importantly, that bill package would give all survivors who were failed by Michigan's narrow statute of limitations a second opportunity to look back and file claims against their abusers and those responsible by establishing a 2-year revival window.
Question number 6.
Oh, wait, I forgot to talk about the other parts of that question. So
of course, go ahead.
The opioid epidemic was in there. And we have been making some progress on the opioid epidemic, but we still really lack the coverage and services that are needed to help those folks that are in need. And we have to keep working with our medical community on how to ensure that patients have access to the treatment they need while reducing their addiction to opioids. And as it relates to gun violence, we have a lot of work to do. We have to close some common sense loopholes. It's harder to get cold medicine and allergy medicine in Michigan than it is to buy a gun, and that is wrong, wrong, wrong. We need to enact universal background checks by closing the private sale and gun show loopholes that exist today. Buying a gun out of somebody's trunk shouldn't be a legal way to get around a background check. And we need to close the open carry loophole that allows guns in our schools. We also need a red flag rule that would help protect our loved ones. Research shows that these types of common sense public safety laws will really save lives. We could save an estimated 35,000 lives each year in this country if we commit to working together to solve the health crisis that's inflicted far too much tragedy.
Question number 6. Please comment on Michigan's infrastructure.
Well, our infrastructure has made some small gains over the past 2 years, but when you look at the numbers, our state and federal roads are going to get much worse over the next 10 to 20 years if we don't act. Fixing the roads is really a math problem. The primary issue is funding. If we had simply indexed the gas tax to inflation in 1951 when we created the act that pays for our roads, it would be over 45 cents today, but instead it lingers at 26 cents. If we had done that indexing, we would have had an extra $32 billion over the past 45 years. If we had simply indexed the gas tax to inflation, making it a sustainable revenue source. But the Republicans have been completely unwilling to hold hearings so that we could objectively examine this issue at the state. We know the condition of every mile of roadway in the state. We know what needs to be done to properly maintain or fix each segment of roadway. But when you are a lawmaker who signs a no tax pledge, that is really an inconvenient topic to discuss, because you don't want to acknowledge that there's a legitimate solution staring everyone right in the face based on engineering. And the Republicans really need to let the engineers come in and testify. I think Meridian Township is a perfect model for the state to emulate. They developed a plan based on engineering and literally mailed a map to all of the residents that showed the road conditions and broke out the math for which road was going to be invested in, and that residents could understand what their tax increase was going to. And that question passed by quite a wide margin. And as a result of that, Meridian Township is investing a lot of money into the infrastructure that's very, very much needed.
Question number 7. Please comment on the quality of Michigan schools and primarily in the district.
We have some of the best school districts in the state locally, but not every child in Michigan is receiving a quality education. In Detroit, in Flint, in Benton Harbor, the property values there are so depressed, they can't rebuild their schools with local millages. So they're forced to take money out of the classrooms to do that. And that means you can't keep and retain the good teachers and support staff that go into a really top-notch district. If you can't rebuild your school buildings, you're going to lose students, and you end up having to close the buildings entirely. So, competition with for-profit charter schools and online schools has really created profound instability in some of these urban communities. And charter schools have led to the closure of a lot of neighborhood schools with no noticeable benefit to the students involved. A lot of work needs to be done in this area.
Question number 8. Please address the preservation of Michigan's natural resources.
Well, coming from Meridian Township, where we have such an amazing record of preservation, starting with our first of its kind in the state land preservation program in 2000, which was the first year that I was elected. I think that many people at home know that this is an area that's very dear to my heart. Historically, protecting our Great Lakes and our natural resources has been a widely bipartisan issue in Michigan. But during lame duck in 2018, the Republican legislature passed a bill that mandated that our state not adopt any standards that were above those of the federal government. And that was a really big departure from the bipartisanship that we usually see on this issue, and prevents Michigan from being a leader in environmental protection. I think if we flip the House, repealing this law would probably be one of our top priorities. Lead contamination, PFAS, green ooze, these are all capturing the headlines. And we are still facing many environmental threats today, but probably the most alarming and most costly of those environmental threats is climate change. We have to dramatically reduce our carbon footprint as a state in order to do our part to address climate change. Michigan's current renewable energy standard is only 15% by 2021, and that's not good enough. I want to applaud Meridian Township's efforts. I know in the budget that they're discussing now, they're looking at spending $300,000 on solar panels, and I think that is a really, really great investment that Meridian Township residents are going to appreciate for their future and their children's future. I'd like to see the state establish a plan for 100% renewable energy by 2050. And I think that's something that folks in our, not just our community in this district, but really statewide support that concept to protect Michigan's vast natural resources.
Question number 9. How would you introduce or change government programs aimed at helping low-income families and those in need?
Well, Brandy, the recovery of Michigan's economy during COVID-19 was a really great example of the economic prosperity we would see if we were to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour and helped lift families out of poverty. The reality is that the high demand jobs that we have in today's economy are in areas that require an advanced degree or skilled trainings. But one of the biggest barriers for families to retrain or acquire the degree they need is childcare. We need programming to help families care for their children while they pursue their degree or training. Nobody working in low-paying service industry jobs is going to be able to afford the childcare to work and go to school. It's just not feasible with the low wages that we have today. But imagine if a mom who goes from stocking shelves or working at a coffee shop were to obtain her RN degree over 2 years at Lansing Community College. She could make a living wage with benefits on just a part-time job at the hospital and be there to help raise her kids if she wanted to. In many cases, you know, the obstacle is the cost of childcare, and that's something that we have the ability to address.
Question number 10 and our last question. What do you think are the biggest challenges facing the district, and how do you plan on addressing those challenges?
I think for our district, one of the biggest challenges that we face locally is state funding for higher education. You know, the university is a huge economic driver in the entire region. And I've been pretty much the most passionate and outspoken advocate in the House for increasing funding for higher ed. You know, when I went to school, I worked a crappy minimum wage job, 20 hours a week during the year and 40 hours a week on my breaks and in the summer. And I was able to pay for half my education. And my parents, who were both teachers, and I was one of 6 children, they paid for the other half. You can't do that today. The state used to fund 80% of the university budgets and tuition funded the other 20%, you know, when I was a student. But today the exact opposite is true. State funding has been slashed and only accounts for 20 to 25% of the university operating funding, while 75% of the budget is coming from tuition. And at the same time, the wages are incredibly low for minimum wage and haven't kept up with that cost of inflation. So students working that part-time job can't pay a significant portion of their college costs with that part-time job. And you know, that's why we're seeing these astronomical tuition rates. It's another example of the state not keeping up with inflation over decades of cutting funding. Infrastructure is probably the other biggest challenge we face in the Lansing region and remains a top priority for really the entire state. I would say those are probably the 2 biggest challenges that we're going to face in the immediate future.
With a few minutes remaining, we would like to give you this opportunity to give a closing statement, Julie.
Well, Brandy, again, I want to thank you and everybody at HOMTV for dealing with COVID and continuing to provide our communities with top-notch information that we really desire, especially in this time when information is coming at us over and over really quickly, and we need to be able to have good sources for it. So I wanna thank you for that. I also really wanna thank voters for putting their trust in me 2 years ago, and would humbly request your vote again. We have so much to accomplish and really need an experienced voice in Lansing. I think that COVID and this pandemic have given us an opportunity to totally transform our state and recognize the inequities that exist today can be changed if we are interested in changing the way that we operate our government. And I'm very much interested in doing this and serving our community for another 2 years. So again, I'd like to thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you at home for watching this candidate interview with Julie Brixie, Democratic Incumbent Candidate for State Representative in the 69th District. I'm Brandy Yates, inviting you to watch live General Election Night coverage right here on HOMTV on November 3rd, and thank you for watching.